The room went silent when she walked in. Every pair of eyes turned toward the woman in the red silk dress, her smile as polished as a magazine cover, her heels clicking against the marble floor of the reception hall. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't on the guest list, not on the seating chart, not in the carefully planned script of my wedding day. But she was there, walking straight toward the tables with a confidence that made my stomach clench. And then my gaze shifted to him, my fiancé. His face drained of color, and in that one frozen second, I knew everything. He had invited her. She moved like she owned the place, like this wedding was just another stage for her to make an entrance. And I let her. I didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't demand explanations. Instead, I smiled. I greeted her as if she belonged. "Welcome," I said softly, leaning close enough for only her to hear. "Your seat is at the head table." Her eyes widened, just a flicker, but it was enough. She hadn't expected that. Neither had he. The clinking of glasses, the whispers spreading like wildfire, the stunned silence at the head table as she lowered herself into a chair meant for family, all of it was exactly how I planned it. What they didn't know is that this moment was only the beginning. My name is Lila Morton, and I was 29 when I discovered what betrayal really looked like. On the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life, I learned that my fiancé, Daniel, had secretly invited his ex-girlfriend to our wedding. He hadn't told me, hadn't asked, hadn't even hinted. He had simply placed her on the guest list like she was entitled to be there. When she walked in, all eyes turned to her, and I realized he had set the stage for my humiliation. But I didn't cry or storm out. I smiled because I knew there was a better way to handle this. I seated her at the head table, right where every camera, every family member, and every guest could watch her and him squirm. What Daniel didn't know is that my revenge was only beginning that night. When I first met Daniel, I wasn't looking for love. I had just come out of a difficult 3-year relationship that had left me questioning my judgment and my worth. At 26, I had convinced myself that maybe I was better off alone for a while. I poured my energy into my work as a project coordinator at a design firm, stayed close to my family, and spent weekends reading in my tiny apartment or visiting my grandmother, who never failed to remind me that love often arrives when you least expect it. It was at a friend's engagement party where Daniel appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He had this charming way of inserting himself into conversations, always ready with a witty comment or an easy smile. He wasn't the kind of man you could ignore, not tall, but he carried himself with confidence, the kind that made you lean in when he spoke. We ended up talking most of that night, and when he walked me to my car, I felt that rush I hadn't felt in years. Daniel worked in finance, though he often joked that it sounded more glamorous than it was. He spoke about long hours, demanding clients, and high expectations, but he never made it sound like a complaint. Instead, he painted it as proof of his resilience, his drive to succeed. I admired that about him. After my last relationship with someone who lacked ambition and direction, Daniel's energy felt refreshing. Our relationship moved quickly. Within a month, he was introducing me to his friends. Within 6 months, he had met my parents, who were impressed by his polite manners and career stability. My father pulled me aside one night and whispered, "He seems like a good one, Lila. Keep this one close." My mother, always cautious, simply smiled and said, "He makes you glow." That was enough for me. There were small red flags, though I didn't see them clearly at the time. Daniel had a way of dominating conversations. If I told a story, he would often interrupt to add his own take, turning the focus back to himself. If I voiced a concern, he would downplay it, calling me too sensitive or saying I was overthinking. I brushed it off, convinced that every couple had their quirks. After all, wasn't love about compromise? He also mentioned his ex, Claire, more than once. At first, it seemed casual, a part of his past he felt comfortable sharing. They had dated for several years, and according to him, she hadn't been ready for the kind of commitment he wanted. He painted her as indecisive, flighty, someone who took him for granted. I listened, sympathized, and assured him he deserved better. What I didn't realize was that this name, Claire, would later become the shadow looming over our wedding day. Despite these subtle uneases, life with Daniel had its sweetness. He made a habit of cooking dinner for me on Fridays, a tradition I grew to love. He would surprise me with flowers after long workdays, and he never forgot important dates. On my 27th birthday, he arranged a weekend getaway to the mountains, where we hiked during the day and curled up by the fire at night. He proposed there, in front of the fireplace, with snow falling softly outside the cabin window. I said yes without hesitation. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with the usual chaos, selecting a venue, deciding on flowers, battling over the guest list. Daniel and I argued a little over the details, mostly because he insisted on inviting more of his business contacts than I had expected. "It's important," he said. "These people will support us in the long run. It's about the image we project." I wanted a smaller, more intimate gathering, but I compromised. After all, he was right in a way. Weddings were not just about love, but also about blending lives, families, and sometimes professional connections. What I didn't know was that hidden among the names on that list was Claire. Looking back, I can see the subtle clues. A hesitation when I asked him to finalize the guest list. A quick deflection when I noticed the numbers seemed higher than I remembered. But I trusted him. I believed in the man who had once looked me in the eye and told me I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. As the day drew closer, my excitement grew, though I also carried the normal jitters every bride feels. I wanted everything to go smoothly, for the day to feel like the beginning of something magical. My friends teased me about being too organized, too meticulous, but that was just who I was. I believed if I planned everything carefully, nothing could go wrong. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, I woke up surrounded by my closest friends, laughter filling the hotel suite as we got ready. My mother hugged me, whispering how proud she was. My grandmother squeezed my hands and said, "You look like the happiest version of yourself." And I did, until she walked in. When Claire appeared at the ceremony, everything inside me shifted. She wasn't just a face in the crowd. She was stunning in a way that felt intentional, like she wanted to draw attention. And from the way Daniel's eyes flickered toward her before he masked his expression, I knew he had invited her. In that moment, my heart cracked, but I didn't let it shatter. I smiled. I stood taller. Because if Daniel thought he could embarrass me on my wedding day, he had no idea who he was dealing with. That was when the seed of revenge took root. I should have been floating on air that morning, caught in the joy of becoming a bride. The bridesmaids had helped me into my dress, the photographer had snapped the first photos, and my mother had dabbed her eyes with a tissue for the 10th time. Everything was perfect until I noticed her. Claire. She was sitting in the 3rd row, her long auburn hair catching the light from the stained glass windows, her lips curled into a smile that looked just a little too satisfied. She wore a dress that was far from subtle, a shade of crimson that screamed for attention. Guests shifted in their seats, some whispering quietly, as if they too wondered why an ex-girlfriend of the groom was front and center on this day of all days. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe she was here by mistake. Maybe she had misunderstood an invitation sent to someone else. But as I followed the line of her gaze, I saw Daniel. His eyes locked with hers for just a fraction of a second before darting away, his jaw tightening. That brief flicker was enough. He knew she was coming. He had invited her. I felt the room spin, though I forced myself to stand tall, bouquet steady in my hands. My stomach twisted, not from nerves, but from betrayal. The man who had promised to love and protect me had secretly invited the woman he once loved to witness our vows. Not only that, she had been placed where I could not avoid her, a deliberate reminder of the past he had supposedly left behind. The ceremony went on, though my mind was far away. I heard the words, the vows, but they floated past me like echoes in a tunnel. I repeated after the officiant, smiled for the photographs, and kissed Daniel when instructed. To the world, it must have looked like a perfect wedding. Inside, I was unraveling. At the reception, the truth became harder to ignore. Claire wasn't lingering at the edges like an awkward guest. She was seated at a table close to the dance floor, laughing loudly, tossing her hair, her presence a constant interruption to my happiness. And every time I caught Daniel glancing in her direction, just quick, nervous glances he thought I didn't notice, I felt another cut deep into my chest. The tipping point came when one of Daniel's college friends, emboldened by too much champagne, leaned in close to me and whispered, "Bold move," inviting Claire. "Guess old flames never really die, huh?" I smiled, though my hands trembled beneath the table. That was when I realized this wasn't just a careless oversight. This was a choice. Daniel hadn't just invited her quietly. He had allowed her to be seen, to be part of our day, to cast a shadow over what should have been ours alone. I excused myself, retreating to the ladies' room, where I finally allowed a tear to slip down my cheek. My maid of honor, Elise, followed me in, her face etched with concern. "What's going on?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but the words burst out. "Claire is here. And Daniel invited her." I saw it in his eyes. He knew. Elise's mouth fell open. "Are you serious? Who invites their ex to their wedding?" "Daniel," I whispered bitterly. "Apparently." For a moment, I thought about leaving. About gathering my things, walking out the door, and letting him explain to everyone why his bride had vanished. But as I looked at my reflection, the carefully pinned hair, the gown I had chosen with love, the woman I had worked so hard to become, something hardened inside me. Why should I be the one to run? Why should I be the one humiliated, when he was the one who had betrayed me? No. If Daniel wanted Claire at the wedding, then she would be there. But not as a shadow in the crowd, not as a whisper in the background. If he wanted her here, I would make sure everyone saw just how close she was. I wiped my tears, steadied my breathing, and returned to the reception with a new resolve burning inside me. I walked straight to the wedding planner, leaned in, and whispered something that made her blink in surprise. But she nodded. She trusted me. Within minutes, the seating arrangement at the head table was adjusted. And when the guests were called to dinner, Claire found herself sitting directly at the head table, beside Daniel. The murmur that rippled through the crowd was everything I had imagined. Shock, confusion, disbelief. Daniel's face went pale, his eyes darting to me in panic. Claire looked smug at first, as though she had won some invisible battle. But when I lifted my glass, smiled sweetly, and announced, "Everyone deserves a seat at the table, don't you think?" The room erupted in uneasy laughter. I had taken his secret and dragged it into the light. And I wasn't finished yet. Because if Daniel thought this was the worst of it, he was sorely mistaken. This was just the beginning. The first course had barely been served when I noticed the shift in the air. Claire leaned toward Daniel, her manicured hand brushing the sleeve of his jacket as she whispered something that made his lips tighten. He pulled back, trying to keep his composure, but the gesture was caught not just by me, but by the two groomsmen seated across the table. They exchanged glances, smirks twitching at the corners of their mouths. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but instead of anger, a calm determination spread through me. Let them all see. Let every guest, every relative, every colleague of Daniel's notice how he allowed his past to sit beside him on the most important day of our lives. When the toasts began, Elise stood, glass raised, her voice steady. She spoke about friendship, resilience, and how she had never seen me happier than when I first said yes to Daniel's proposal. I smiled, though it felt like wearing a mask. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood, thanked everyone, stumbled through a few jokes. But when he turned to toast me, his eyes betrayed him. They darted briefly to Claire before settling on me. Just 1 second too long. And in that single glance, he confirmed to the entire head table what I already knew: his ex still occupied space in his mind. The room was silent for a beat longer than it should have been. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The crack had begun to show. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of silence linger before raising my glass with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. To Daniel, I said softly, and to all the people he felt deserved a place in our story. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. And Daniel, pale and sweating, forced a smile while Claire smirked beside him. The first cut had been made. By the time the dancing started, whispers had already begun weaving through the crowd. I could hear them as I moved from table to table, greeting guests. Why is she here? Do you think the bride knew? I saw the way she looked at him. The questions floated like smoke, impossible to pin down but impossible to ignore. Guests stared a little longer, conversations paused as I passed, then resumed in hushed tones when I was gone. I let it happen. In fact, I encouraged it. Each time someone leaned close to ask, "Isn't that his ex?" I smiled with a serene expression and replied, "Yes, Daniel thought it was important she join us." The effect was electric. What had started as curiosity grew into scandal. People began watching Daniel more closely, noting his stiffness, the way his hand twitched when Claire brushed against him, the nervous glance he gave me when he thought no one was watching. And I played the gracious bride. I danced with my father, twirled with my nephew, laughed loudly with Elise. I looked radiant, untouched by the storm. It was Daniel who looked small, uncomfortable, cornered by a decision he thought would remain in the shadows. At one point, I caught Claire basking in the attention, her smile wide, her laugh ringing louder than anyone's on the dance floor. She thought she was winning. She thought her presence unsettled me. What she didn't realize was that every laugh, every glance, every whisper made Daniel look weaker, not me. By midnight, the whispers had become a current pulling through the reception. And I knew it was only a matter of time before the dam broke. It happened just after the cake was cut. I had made a point of handing Claire a slice myself, smiling sweetly as I placed it in front of her. For the guest of honor, I said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Laughter bubbled around us, though Daniel's face had turned the color of chalk. Minutes later, as guests filtered toward the bar, Daniel pulled me aside. His grip was tight on my arm, his voice low and urgent. "What are you doing?" he hissed. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "You sat her at the head table. You've been making comments all night. You're embarrassing me." I let the words sink in, savoring the irony. "Embarrassing you? Daniel, you invited her. You put her in that seat long before I did." His mouth opened, but no defense came. Just silence. I leaned closer, my voice a whisper sharp enough to cut. "You didn't think I'd find out? You thought you could bring her here, parade her like some twisted secret, and I'd just smile and thank you." He looked around nervously, making sure no one could hear. "I didn't parade her. She's just a guest." "Guests don't get head table seats," I murmured. "Unless you wanted her there. Unless she still means something." His face crumpled, panic flickering in his eyes. He opened his mouth again, but I pulled my arm free and stepped back, smiling brightly as a group of guests approached. To them, it must have looked like nothing at all, just a bride and groom caught in an intimate moment. But inside, Daniel was unraveling. I could see it in the way his smile shook, the way his laugh faltered. And that was when I knew I had him exactly where I wanted him. He had brought his ex into our wedding. He had tried to humiliate me quietly. Instead, I had turned the light on him, and now he stood exposed before every guest he had hoped to impress. The only thing left was to decide how far I wanted to take it. And as the band struck up the first notes of our supposed first dance, I already knew my answer. This was no longer just about Claire. It was about Daniel and showing him what it felt like to be dismissed, diminished, and made irrelevant in front of a crowd. The revenge was coming, and it would be unforgettable. The music swelled, soft and sweeping, as the band began to play our chosen first dance song. Guests gathered in a loose circle, phones lifted, faces glowing with expectation. This was supposed to be our moment. The one captured forever in photos and memories, where bride and groom move in perfect step as husband and wife. Daniel reached for my hand. His palm was clammy, his smile trembling. I let him take it, but I didn't move forward. Instead, I stood still in the middle of the floor, eyes sweeping the crowd, then landing squarely on Claire, perched elegantly at the head table, her champagne glass poised, her smirk daring me to break. I didn't break. I turned to Elise, who stood nearby, ready with her camera. "Would you mind joining us for just a moment?" I asked sweetly. The guests stirred with curiosity. Elise looked surprised but nodded, stepping forward with her glass. "And actually," I continued, voice rising so it carried through the hall, "since Daniel felt it was important to invite Claire, I think it's only fair that she join us too. After all, she's been such a significant part of his life." The room went still. A gasp rippled through the guests like wind over water. Claire froze, eyes wide, hand tightening around her glass. Daniel's face drained of color as he stammered, "What are you doing?" under his breath. But it was too late. "Come on, Claire," I said warmly, gesturing toward the floor. "You're practically family, aren't you?" Every head turned to watch. Claire, emboldened by the attention, rose with an exaggerated smile, her heels clicking against the floor as she walked to my side. The crowd parted like a curtain, whispers rising in a storm. Daniel looked as though the ground might open beneath him. The band, sensing the tension, faltered for a moment, but I gave them a nod to continue. The music swelled again, the irony of the love ballad ringing sharper than any silence could. I stepped back, releasing Daniel's hand, and in one smooth motion, I placed Claire's hand into his. Gasps echoed around the hall. "If you wanted her here so badly," I said, my voice clear as crystal, "then let everyone see exactly where your heart really lies." Daniel stuttered, shaking his head, his lips forming words he couldn't seem to push out. Claire, for all her bravado, looked caught between triumph and terror. She glanced at him, then at me, as if trying to decide whether this was a trap or an opportunity. It was both. I lifted my champagne glass high. To Daniel and Claire, I declared, my smile razor sharp. "May old flames never die, even if they burn down a wedding." The room erupted. Some laughed nervously, others gasped, and still others clapped with cruel amusement. Phones lifted higher, capturing every second. Daniel's career contacts, colleagues, and even his own family stood in stunned silence as the truth, or at least the version I'd crafted, unfolded before their eyes. Daniel dropped Claire's hand as though it burned him. "This isn't true," he shouted, his voice cracking. I don't. But the damage was done. He could deny it all he wanted, yet no one could unsee what they had just witnessed. The groom, sweating and panicked, caught between his new bride and his old lover in the middle of his own wedding. I turned, set my glass down, and walked off the floor with the calm poise of a queen leaving her court. Guests parted to let me pass. I could feel their eyes on me, their admiration at my composure, their pity for Daniel. Behind me, his voice chased after me, desperate, pleading. "Wait. Please wait." I didn't turn back. Not once. Instead, I walked straight out of the hall and into the cool night air, my gown trailing behind me like a banner. The stars glittered overhead, and for the first time that day, I breathed freely. Inside, chaos reigned. I could hear it even through the doors, the clamor of voices, the shock, the outrage. Some guests would leave, embarrassed. Others would stay, hungry for gossip. But no one would ever forget what they had seen. Daniel had tried to humiliate me quietly, slipping his ex into our wedding like a shadow in the corner. I had dragged that shadow into the spotlight. And in the end, it wasn't me who looked small. It was him. Because nothing says too weak to let go like holding hands with your ex at your own wedding. And that was the justice I had planned from the very beginning. The morning after the wedding, I woke up alone in my apartment. Not the honeymoon suite we had booked, not the tropical island we were meant to fly to that evening. Just my own bed in my own space, with sunlight streaming through the blinds like a blessing. My phone was full of messages. Some from friends telling me I was brave. Others from family asking if I was all right. A few from strangers who had somehow gotten hold of the video that was already spreading online, a video of me calmly placing Claire's hand in Daniel's, toasting them with a smile that cut sharper than glass. Daniel called. Again and again. His voicemails grew more desperate with each hour. It wasn't what you think. Claire means nothing. Please, we can fix this. Don't throw it all away. But it wasn't me who had thrown anything away. It was him. Long before the wedding day, with every lie, every half-truth, every insult disguised as a joke. Inviting her was simply the final straw that snapped the whole fragile structure apart. I didn't answer his calls. I didn't need to. By the second week, his messages stopped. Word spread that some of his business partners, who had been in attendance that night, had quietly withdrawn from future deals. His reputation had been tarnished by whispers of disloyalty and poor judgment. The wedding video didn't help. It circulated among his colleagues, a reminder that even in personal matters, Daniel had a knack for burning bridges. Claire, from what I heard, disappeared almost as quickly as she had reappeared. She had basked in the drama of that night, but once the consequences hit Daniel, she slipped back into the shadows. People like her never stay to clean up the mess. As for me, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. I sold the dress. I canceled the honeymoon tickets and booked my own trip instead, to Italy, a place I had always wanted to see. I ate gelato on cobblestone streets, painted sunlit balconies, and sat alone in quiet piazzas, not lonely, but free. Looking back now, I don't regret what I did. Some people believe revenge should be loud, dramatic, destructive. But mine was simple. I held up a mirror. I made Daniel face his choices in front of everyone he wanted to impress. He tried to make me small. He tried to make me a background figure in my own story. But I refused. And in refusing, I became larger than the moment, larger than his betrayal. So here's what I'll leave you with. Have you ever been told to stay quiet, to accept less, to step aside? Maybe the question isn't whether you can forgive. Maybe the real question is, when they show you who they truly are, will you let them write your ending? Or will you, like I did, take the pen back into your own hands? If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments.